All right, so today we're going deep on something I know a lot of language learners think about. It's the idea of needing a perfect accent to really be fluent. And, we've got a ton of different sources here, like dictionary definitions and some pretty in-depth linguistic discussions. And, the goal is to kind of figure out what actually matters most when you want to get good at a language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people think they need to sound like a native speaker, but maybe that's not exactly the case.
So, maybe we should start by looking at, what it even means to be fluent, right? Like, what does that word even mean?
Yeah, I think when we look at what fluency is all about, it seems to come down to being able to speak without much effort and being easy to understand. I mean, when you hear someone who's fluent, their speech just flows naturally,
Yeah, for sure. And all of our sources point to this in different ways. Like Wikipedia talks about, speaking in a fluid and coherent way. And then you've got the Cambridge Dictionary, which highlights speaking easily and quickly. And even in these online discussions, people are talking about how it's all about communicating your thoughts and thinking in the language without translating in your head.
It's that ease and smoothness that we recognize as fluency.
Yeah.
It's different from proficiency, which has more to do with accuracy, like how good your grammar and vocabulary are.
Yeah, it's like, a little kid, they can be totally fluent, but their grammar might be all over the place, right? But then you've got someone who knows all the grammar rules, but they speak so hesitantly that it's hard to follow.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that your accent is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to being proficient in a language. You've got your grammar, vocabulary, comprehension, pronunciation. And that's where accent comes in.
So it sounds like accent is like a subcategory of pronunciation, which itself is just one part of this bigger idea of language proficiency.
Right. And accent mainly affects how you speak. But being able to understand different accents is also part of proficiency, and that affects how well you listen too.
It's interesting when you look at some of the big frameworks for assessing language skills, like the CEFR, that's the Common European Framework of Reference, and the ACTFL, which is used a lot in the US.
Yeah, what's interesting is that these frameworks, they don't really focus on having a perfect accent.
It seems like they're way more interested in whether you can actually use the language in real-world situations.
Absolutely. Communicative competence is the term for that. Being able to use the language effectively in different contexts.
So like knowing when to be formal or informal, stuff like that.
Exactly. It's not just about grammar. It's also about picking up on social cues, like you said, organizing your thoughts in a logical way, and even figuring out how to communicate when you run into challenges.
So would you say that accent is kind of a subset of the pronunciation aspect, but it's not the whole thing?
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so let's talk about something super important here. And that's the difference between being intelligible versus having perfect pronunciation.
Yeah, and what our sources really stress is that being understood is way more crucial than having an accent that sounds exactly like a native speaker.
Right, because at the end of the day, the whole point of speaking is to get your message across.
And intelligibility is how well people understand your message.
So focusing on being clear and understandable takes a lot of pressure off of language learners.
Definitely. And think about it. We live in such a globalized world these days. I mean, we're constantly hearing and understanding people with different accents, and that includes native speakers too, right? Even within the same language, people have different accents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, trying to completely erase your accent can actually feel like you're losing a part of your identity.
Absolutely. And I think it's great to embrace the uniqueness of your own voice.
No, it's not that pronunciation doesn't matter at all. Clear articulation definitely helps people understand the words you're saying.
Of course. But the main objective is for people to get what you're trying to say.
If you spend too much time stressing over perfect accent, you might miss out on opportunities to build your vocabulary or improve your grammar, which are huge for fluency.
I see what you mean. So it's about finding that balance, right?
Exactly.
Another interesting point is that while many learners strive for a native-like accent, it's really not essential for being fluent.
Right. You can be super fluent and communicate really well with your own accent.
Totally. And achieving a native-like accent as an adult can actually be really difficult for various reasons.
And it's worth noting that native-like fluency, which means having a very high level of command of the language, is not the same thing as having a native-like accent.
Yeah, those are two separate things. And sometimes a foreign accent can even be a good thing. It can be an icebreaker or make you more memorable.
It can definitely make you stand out in a positive way.
And while strong accents might create some challenges in certain situations, functional fluency is the ultimate goal.
It's about being able to use the language effectively in your daily life.
Exactly. And don't let this quest for perfect pronunciation stop you from developing those core communication skills.
Another thing we have to talk about is how people perceive accents, because native speakers definitely categorize others based on how they sound.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this can come with some biases. We tend to prefer what sounds familiar to us.
So foreign accents can sometimes lead to negative social judgments, and it's not always because people don't understand.
It's often due to these social categories we create and the fact that it takes a bit more effort for our brains to process unfamiliar speech.
And sadly, those with heavier accents can be subject to unfair biases.
Absolutely, it's important to recognize and challenge these biases.
And language learners often feel a lot of pressure about their accents, which can lead to accent anxiety.
Yeah, it's a real phenomenon and it can hold people back.
So the main takeaway here is don't let the desire for a perfect accent overshadow your ability to communicate effectively.
Your accent is a part of you, and it's something to be proud of.
Okay, so bottom line, clear communication is what really defines success in a language.
Absolutely. It's about being able to make yourself understood.
So the real question is, can you get your message across? That's what truly matters.
And there are so many things you can do to improve your clarity. You can focus on key sounds, stress intonation, speaking at a good pace, and of course, keep working on your vocabulary and grammar.
Those are all essential building blocks.
So the main message here is focus on making yourself understood. That's the core of language learning.
When you can communicate clearly, it builds your confidence and encourages you to practice more.
And it's so important to develop a positive attitude towards your own accent. It's a natural part of your language journey and often a sign of being multilingual.
For sure. And I think educators should also promote this positive view of diverse accent.
It's about celebrating the richness of different languages and cultures.
So to wrap things up, fluency is so much more than just accent. It's about communicating effectively and being understood.
And embrace your accent. It's part of what makes your language journey unique.
That's a great way to put it. And, it makes me wonder, how would your approach to language learning change if you focused more on communicating clearly and less on having a perfect accent?
That's a great question to think about. And what new aspects of the language might you prioritize if you shifted your focus in that way?
Some really interesting things to consider.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was great being here.
Until next time.
See you later.